Continuing The Treasure of the Magi, a study of modern Zoroastrianism by James Hope Moulton. The book's a century old, but we're dealing with a reprint here, so The Religion of the Latter Avesta. We're in section, we're in program F, aren't we? Yeah. In connection with this, we may take the next allied subject of asceticism. From Zarathustra down, the witness of Parsi religion has here been unequivocal and undeviating. The Parsi heretic Mani found an easier field for his rigorous doctrine in Christendom than among his own religious kin. Christianity in its early stages in its early centuries was subject to influences which produced a very serious aberration from the principles of Christ as set forth in the New Testament, but not that of Paul, though. Hence, through many ages, asceticism was treated as an ideal, and Christian saints were as thoroughgoing as a Hindu ascetic is in their contempt for body as the source of all evil and the enemy of the soul. We need not assert that the result was wholly evil. I've went into the Quranic opposition to extremism and Zarathustra's opposition to extremism, but is it one of the greater evils to do the wrong thing? Say, no, well, I know it's the different, my intentions don't make up for being the wrong thing. That's, what these people should be thinking. But it's not always out of contempt for the body. Stern discipline is sometimes hedonistic, sometimes Epicurean. We need not assert that, it may well have been that the excessive protest against a sensual world was in those days the only one that could make itself heard, and that accordingly the ascetic preserved the idea of purity for the world in the only effective manner. Be that as it may, there can be no question that the ascetic theory is an indicament of the Creator and a justification of pessimism, a world which can only exist by indulging a degrading appetite for food and drink, and only prolong itself into a new age by yielding to a natural impulse which is inherently impure. The natural impulses aren't impure. We're supposed to be on our nature, but that's the difference Christianity brought about. Is a world that does no credit to its maker. One who holds such a view should logically look not only with Gautama at the sorrow-stricken and the decrepit, but at the young and strong and beautiful, and declare, "These say the babe is wise, that weepeth being born." Against all these perversions of true theism, denounced in the Christian scripture, and the grumbling of my stomach apparently too, as doctrines of demons, Zoroastrianism in all its history has raised a constant protest. The prophet himself, whom the legend declared to have laughed when he was born, was an optimist through and through. Doctrines of Demons, 1 Timothy 4, 1-5. And the qualifying, if the Magi are to be regarded as authoritative classical writers, tells us of the sects of the Magi, which neither kill nor eat anything living, or again eat vegetables, cheese, and bread, and sleep on the bare ground, or practice celibacy. If we remember that the Magi were originally independent of Zoroastrianism, and included communities which never embraced it at all, we can accept the well-attested statement without difficulty. These ascetic Magi will in fact be elements in the spiritual ancestry of Gautama and Mahavira. And we see very strongly too, another thing going on is that the Davas Yasnas and other less obvious different faiths always exist amongst, but the Magi, originally compiled Zoroaster's teaching, which indicate that the 1700 to 2000 BCE is language of the old Avesta, is possibly of something much earlier. So the legends of it being 4,000 years before that, or even, 6,000 years before that or something is, I forget the exact year, but it's, thousands and thousands of years before that. So it's very possible. Was an optimist through and through. One of his gathas is a marriage hymn, and the marriage hymn of his own daughter. Priests have always been married, and the superior virtue of the married over the celibate has always been an article of faith. Similarly, with fasting and austerities, never has any such method of spiritual achievement reached the slightest encouragement from Zarathustra or his successors, nor has the denial of property as something inherently evil found its way into Parsi conceptions of goodness. The question of the effects of this optimistic outlook upon life of the community may be left till we come to that subject. At present, it is enough to assure ourselves in this and other departments of ethics that obedience to the precepts of the Avesta would produce a clean living, honest, and trustworthy people. Know them by their fruits, right? And pretty much every faith has, most satanic sects produce better people than, in material terms at least, than completely secular people. Or even the Church of Satan, where the people act out atheism, but they don't believe in atheism. Not that I'm advocating one goes to just follows whatever religion. I'm not making that point, but there is merit to whatever religion. That's why freedom of religion is very important. It's important for other reasons too, but for it is not to be forgotten that the great triad of word and thought and deed has lost none of its prominence, so that if conscious, enforced, a really strict obedience to the letter and spirit of the Scripture, conduct would be on a high level. There is no consecrated impurity, no religious sanction of murder, no causistic defense of lying in these sacred books, even though we cannot honestly repel the charge of triviality, foolishness, and lack of proportion. Let me also remind that in the Bible, the deceit is allowed not for survival reasons, but reasons that one would say aren't appropriate. On the positive side, we must not overlook the strong insistence upon charity. It is limited to the faithful. To minister to a follower of the demons was evidently regarded as equivalent to approval of his wickedness. Well, encouraging people or helping them out in what's right is not quite the same thing now, is it? But every act of almsgiving to the followers of Asha made fairer the self that was preparing to meet the faithful soul and escort him to heaven. The Yazad Rata is specially charged with his department of righteousness, and she is an associate of the great Ameshaspand, Automati, devotion or piety. The 5th day of the month belongs to the good holy Armati, the good fair-sing Mazda-made righteous Rata. Siruza 1:5. And a prayer for prosperity of all kinds to come on the worshipper's house, we read, in this house obedience vanquish, disobedience peace, smite unpeace, bounty vanquish niggard temper, piety and pious rebellion, word true spoken, word false spoken, Asha smite the Druge forever. Yasht 65. It is a comprehensive benediction. He who offers it has only to live up to it, and he will live thereby. On the other subject claims our attention before we pass out of the Avesta and examine the religion as it is today. We have depicted the historical Zarathustra and traced his beliefs and teachings. What about the prophet in the latter Avesta? Dr. Dalla summarizes the development succinctly. Zoroaster is a historical personage in the Gathas. In the latter Avesta, he is surrounded by an aureole and becomes, a halo, and becomes superhuman. We all have light, heat, and magnetism and moisture fields around us. But in the path he works, his personality is enshrouded by miracles, and he is transformed into a myth. Well, of course, the legends, the true or not, the legends of the prophets have meaning. They have purpose. That's what makes a myth. Your own Bibles, thank you, James Hope Moulton. Mythos. Mythos is what I just described. Imagined, made up. That's another word in that one verse that I believe I mentioned earlier in this thing. So they're talking about something different. It's not that you don't have myths, it's that you don't invent myths. There's personal mythologization that can be perfectly honest, but the process begins in the age when verse was still written. We might quote from the Yasht of the Fravashis, omitting at first the prose parts. It is a cry of joy at the birth of Zarathustra, mighty who gives all life's comforts, the first teacher of the nations, through whom came the Ashambhohu, all the spells in one including, spells are a linguistic arrangement. It doesn't necessarily mean anything evil, magic-y. Master judge of all creation, he the law of all existence, best to men himself revealed, him the bountiful immortals long for, with the sun accordant, glad in faith, with heart devoted, master judge of all creation, in his birth and his upgrowing, plants and waters all exalted, in his birth and his upgrowing, all the creatures of the holy, hailed the promise, sure of blessing, to our prayer is born the fire priest. He, Spitma Zarathustra, he will worship us. Well, he will mention us, or maybe referring to the us in terms of God being, like if a king talks, he says, if a king or a president talks, they say us or we or stuff like that when they just mean themselves. He will worship us, or he'll mention it with barsom, duly spread, with libations, lo henceforth the law extendeth, the good law of Mazda worship. Okay, well, obviously he's only worshipping Mazda if it's Mazda Yasnaha. Yash 13:90 through 94. The barsom was a bundle of boughs, referred to Ezekiel 8:17, held by the priest before the sacred fire. Now, here's where there were Soma. Ephedra was one of the plants that went into Soma. Haoma could include up to 37 other plants according to certain recipes. Some of these enhance the meaning, some of them enhance the intoxication, and I'm not saying that for non-medical uses that we are for mere I don't like how I feel sorts of things. Okay. Dharmastester suspected a reference to the wheel of Buddhism in that passage that we just talked about. This beautiful poetry is accompanied by much prose to the same effect. We hear that the sage was not only the first fire priest, but also the first warrior, and the first plowman, and the first to turn his face away from the demons. Because certainly the males and females that would want to be worshipped are the demons, and God is beyond gender, and the light beings don't want worship, and the forces of nature, they don't want worship either. And if the passage were capable of bearing any weight at all, we might see here a hint that Zarathustra was not a priest at all, except in the way that every head of a family could act as a priest in primitive days of simplicity and worship. Now, every prophet sort of is as the best example for his people, and the best that could have been possibly chosen at the time to do the task at hand, and therefore the example. And obviously the revelation came through him, and more could come. He's still alive. The prophet of the time and place is, he would be the high priest. But that doesn't mean that he's reinstituting that sort of order now, does it? Our verse passage will suffice to show that Dr. Dalla's aureole is no fancy, and that it is one for which the Gathas give us no warrant of expectation. One interesting addition is made in the Vendidad to the spiritual history of Zarathustra, and if stripped of its fantastic diction, it could be regarded as psychologically true. In the 19th Vargad of the Vendidad, we read how Ahriman set the fiend Buete to kill the prophet. He recited the Ahanaverio, sacrificed into the river Daitya, and said his creed. Kind of like the Srimad Bhagavatam, where the guy touches the water and basically an ablutionist prayer. It's the same sort of thing. Recited the Ahanaverio, said his creed. Buiti retired, baffled, and the prophet realized that the demons were bent on killing him, went forward unsubdued by the hardness of the malignant riddles of ill thought.